Welcome, everyone. This is Greg Rock, and I wanted to welcome you to today's webcast, Bpm Trends and Opportunities for 2013, featuring Janelle Hill, Gartner VP and Distinguished Analyst. Janelle is obviously a very familiar face to many of the folks within Bpm Institute, having served on our editorial advisory board and the most prominent analyst in the BPM space. And so we're thrilled to have Janelle with us today to encapsulate some of the things that Gartner sees coming in 2013, and also how some of those things will represent themselves at Gartner's BPM Summits in 2013. So first, Janelle, I want to thank you and Gartner for giving us the time to come down and share your outlook with our members. BPM Institute has been proud to be part of the BPM Summits since their launch, and we're hoping that you can tell us what the outlook is for 2013 and how some of those things will be included at the BPM Summits this year. BPM Institute will be taking part in all 3 summits this year. We have some additional activity planned at the events. I'll tell you more about that later, including some special offers for our members to attend the summits. So with that, Janelle, I'll turn things over to you.
Great. Thanks, Greg. And I'm very pleased to be here to talk about our view of the BPM Trends and Opportunities for 2013. Greg, as I was listening to you, I was thinking how you and I have been working on business process management now together for over 10 years. And it is a topic that is of perennial interest, we find, around the world, whether the economy is going up or the economy is flat or even in a recession, as a technique for overall driving better performance outcomes. It's perennially of interest to our clients. So we're very pleased to be presenting our annual conference series around the world and to be partnered with the BPM Institute. The major trends and opportunities I'm going to highlight this morning are, first, that after 10 years of history in business process management, we find organizations are finally beginning to recognize that BPM is not just your father's business process reengineering. It's not just all about standardizing a single process and driving a process for the greatest amount of efficiency gains you can squeeze out of it and reducing costs. But we're beginning to see organizations now really starting to focus on moving beyond those efficiency gains, emphasizing effectiveness, particularly workforce effectiveness, and even how to innovate their organization and their business through process. 2 major examples of that, which I'll highlight this morning, are intelligent business operations, which Gartner describes as the newest usage scenario for BPM, and then also Social BPM. The second major trend I'll talk about is the ongoing focus on BPM maturity and organizations' efforts to really advance their skills and the application of BPM disciplines in order to drive higher outcomes. It's not just BPM for its own sake. It's all about using BPM skills like process analysis, process benchmarking, and measurement in order to drive a higher business outcome. Third major trend, of course, there's a lot of focus on the cloud and what opportunities there are for leveraging the cloud, either for business process services in more of an outsourcing fashion, or for even building your own innovative processes that maybe connect your organization with others in your value chain. And then lastly, with all of these major initiatives, of course, we need to transform how the organization works. So there's a lot more focus now on change management as one of the disciplines, with a focus on how do we actually get the people to change how they're behaving and adopt some of these new approaches. Key to business process management in 2013 is recognizing that the key questions your top executives are pondering, they play into business process management, but in fact they don't know that themselves. So if they're thinking about issues related to competition or the global economy or how to optimize their resources or what new products and services to introduce, any one of those strategic focuses requires you to change how you operate. And BPM at its heart is simply about finding the most effective ways for getting work done, how to implement those strategic objectives into day-to-day operations. But many of our top business executives and even CIOs are not making that linkage between what the organization is trying to do and how to get there. BPM is the how for delivering towards those objectives. Gartner has defined BPM as indicated on this slide. We focus on process as an asset that if you manage it really well, it will directly contribute to higher enterprise-level performance results, not just functional organizational results. And it does that by helping you drive towards operational excellence as well as agility. The major expectation now amongst practitioners is that by using modern BPM techniques as well as modern BPM technology, I can increase the visibility of the process and work in the process. So that really helps management and even participants literally see what the resources are being coordinated in the process and what our interdependencies are. That visibility helps drive better accountability and traceability for who's doing what, with what information, how was the work actually accomplished. It puts a lot of emphasis on empowering your workforce to figure out what's the best way of getting something done. And most importantly, in my opinion, it's that accountability and traceability that will give management all the way up to top-level executives that clear line of sight for measuring how are we working right now and how does that directly tie to that strategic outcome I just mentioned. And then lastly, the focus on why you do BPM to drive better operational results, but also now agility really speaks to some different ideas in business process management, particularly around this notion of design by doing the work. For years, we have done work based on a design that somebody else predefined and prescribed and imposed on us as a workforce. The flip of that is now happening in BPM, and especially in modern BPM technology, where we can design the process by actually doing the work and let the process more evolve over time. And part of that attribute is also a big focus on collaboration, social collaboration amongst the people who participate in the process. Not only your employees, but also maybe your customers and certainly your partners. Now, I mentioned up front that BPM, the whole point of doing BPM is to drive higher business performance outcomes. And we assess organizations' progress using a 5-level maturity model at Gartner. And as you can see, as indicated on this slide, there's value at every level of the maturity model. By focusing on process, you begin to identify what your opportunities are for further improvements. The first set of improvements every organization realizes does relate to reducing costs and increasing productivity. And yes, a lot of that is through automation, but very often first projects simply achieve that outcome by cutting out stupid things. Stop doing duplicate effort, stop collecting the same data 3 times over, stop performing outdated procedures, and until you get the cross-boundary view of the process, many organizations don't even know that they're doing those things. The big hurdle is level 3, but if an organization can get to level 3, then they're coordinating the flow of work across their boundaries and typically across their organizational silos. And the reason you want to do that is because when you can achieve that, profit margins actually go up. And they go up as a result of that streamlining and further focus on error reduction. At level 4, that organization is able to use the goals, the performance outcomes for the specific process, to consistently provide feedback to the workers in that process to know how they're performing. And as a result of that tight loop between executing the process and monitoring the process, organizations at level 4 can very consistently forecast the performance result they're going to achieve. And guess who likes that? Wall Street loves that. At level 5, you take that discipline across your processes. A level 5 organization is really optimizing the enterprise results because they can consistently meet their forecast, not just one process at a time, but across all of their operations, because people don't work typically anymore in just one process. We have a role in multiple processes. And yet, despite all of that value, unfortunately, very few organizations really achieve those maximum benefits. From the survey work we've done once again in 2012, we find that almost 90% of the world pursuing BPM is still just below level 3. They're really struggling to get to that level 3 and above. But as you can see from the percentages here, some organizations know how to do it. So one of the key focus areas for our conference series in 2013 is to highlight what is it that 10% knows that others don't. How can we socialize some of those better practices into more organizations so that they can drive higher business results? What we find in our surveys year after year, and once again in 2012, is that the #1 top obstacle to enterprise BPM adoption, reaching across boundaries, continues to be what practitioners call organizational politics or organizational conflicts. The second biggest issue is constantly changing business conditions and that need to constantly change how the process works. Organizational politics, in our view at Gartner, is essentially a people issue. What happens with the traditional, hierarchically and very often functionally organized structure, there are white spaces between each one of those functional silos. And although the functional silo may be very well managed, I might even suggest that your functional silos have optimal performance outcomes. What happens is that work going across the silos is not coordinated, not well coordinated, and not driving enterprise performance optimization. And the simple reason for that is really people. Each one of those functions has a senior executive leading it, and the minute you as a practitioner suggest that you might want to do a better job coordinating how work moves across the organization, how the collective efforts create value for your customers, the minute you start to threaten the power base of any one of those executives, very often executive compensation is literally tied to the performance outcome of their function, not their enterprise. You might threaten the job security of people who work in their function, and at a minimum, the default expectation of the workforce is that when you begin to propose process improvements, they're afraid you're going to automate them out of a job and that you're going to dumb down their particular work and impact their value based on their expertise. Many of those expectations are an extreme view, and there's many ways of applying BPM disciplines without such an extreme outcome, and that also will be a focus in our research for 2013 and in our BPM summits. Very often we find the IT organization these days is even initiating business process management, particularly outside of manufacturing industries where process thinking originated. A lot of times we find the IT organization and the CIO initiating a focus on process. The major fall down that we find is that in talking about BPM, IT tends to quickly start talking about technology instead of really making the linkage between how the disciplines of BPM will really focus efforts on your CEO's top business priorities. This chart shows some data from our annual CEO and CIO survey. And notice down at the bottom, to the CEO, in 2012, moving into 2013, streamlining operations and emphasizing efficiency are pretty low on the list. Why? Most organizations have already achieved that. The big focus going into 2013 is a return to growth. Yes, we need to continue to maintain costs, if not lower them, but most organizations at the CEO level are starting to shift their focus back to growth, acquiring and attracting new customers, entering new markets, delivering new products, all of those types of strategies. And a focus on process can help you deliver to any one of those strategies. In addition to knowing what is the strategic direction, we also recommend that process improvement leaders should really identify key business risks that the organization needs to manage and link managing that risk to what we describe as situation awareness through process. The process context links together people, systems, information flows, organizational units, and that broad process context, particularly when enabled with modern BPM technology, delivers that visibility and adaptability that I talked about up front. That creates this situation awareness. So if you can identify what are the two most important business risk factors in your enterprise that must be mitigated in 2013, you can also use that information then when you want to promote to the idea of one specific business process management initiative versus another. And this is data, again, from our 2012 CEO study about what the senior business leaders see as the most important risks. One, of course, is the ongoing constant amount of change in regulatory requirements. Many industries are constantly having to adjust how they operate just to meet changing regulatory requirements. Of course, there are financial risks, and everybody's still worried about whether the economy will slow down or stay flat or whatever on a worldwide basis. So use this type of data to identify what the risks are in your business. Now, I did mention up front that one of the key ideas is shifting beyond just efficiency into effectiveness and innovation. And we've described a new usage pattern for BPM and particularly advanced BPM technologies that we call intelligent business operations. And intelligent business operations is essentially about linking insights into what's going on in your operational environment, how your customers are responding to actions directly. It transforms an organization from kind of the traditional vertically integrated operations to a virtually integrated operational environment by linking people, systems, data, everything together in this continuous feedback loop, where the newer technologies, things like event processing and decision management technologies, are surfacing up to participants and managers a dashboard of information that gives them that situation awareness that I described earlier. And based on that situation awareness, participants are empowered through the technology to take immediate action to maybe capitalize on an opportunity or avoid a threat or collaborate with someone new, find the right expert, and really very quickly identify what's our best next action based on this context, this customer, this moment, instead of having all responses treated exactly the same. Instead of instituting one singular, standardized, rigid best practice, intelligent business operations is about a much more fluid operating environment where individuals are empowered to make the right decision, the best decision for that moment. It also supports that type of empowerment with technology that helps individuals make better, more consistent, more traceable decisions, allows them to very quickly respond to events and have direct access to resources, to adjust how those resources work. It allows them to dynamically adapt work itself, and it fosters more ad hoc, unplanned social types of collaboration amongst the workforce. And of course, today in a global enterprise, this kind of environment has to run on a 24/7 basis. This is an emergent BPM usage scenario, but this is the scenario that we see organizations at level 3, 4, and 5 maturity pursuing. Now, you might wonder who can afford to do intelligent business operations, or when is it justified? And the simple answer is when the value of integrated analytics can improve the business outcome of an individual transaction, that's intelligent business operations. For years, we have done analytics, but offline from the transaction processing. We've always separated data warehousing and operational data stores and BI tools from the transaction processing. Intelligent business operations links those analytics right back into the flow of work. So the obvious industry pattern for this is the investment community with algorithmic trading, where when an event happens that's going to potentially impact a trade, you need to sense that event within maybe 0.5 milliseconds, and maybe you have 5 milliseconds to take an action based on that event. And that's why we now have things like automated trading. But beyond trading, there are many other examples in industries. For example, in any type of high-volume customer contact center, any industry where you want to give more individualized and personalized attention to incoming calls, you're generally going to have 5 seconds when you're talking to an individual on the phone to recognize whether or not that's an opportunity to cross-sell or upsell, for example. And you might have about 3 minutes to initiate that action, cross-selling or upselling. Any industries related to transportation, whether that's the airlines, the trains, third-party logistics, retail and distribution, for example, there are many situations where a disruptive event to a transportation schedule or a delivery, you have a short window in which to recognize you have that disruption, and then a little longer time frame than my previous 2 examples. You might have 1 minute or so to recognize that there's been a disruption and you have to reroute the truck, but you may actually have a fairly large window, a full day, in which to reschedule that delivery. I have a couple kids in college who have recently moved off campus, so I've had to buy each one of them beds to get into their apartment. And this scenario actually comes from that experience where I realized, with a bed delivery, I need the retailer to recognize very quickly that there's some disruption that's going to affect when that bed is delivered, but they have a day. The bed has to be delivered not the day before the lease starts and not the day after that the lease starts, but within that 24-hour period. And so that's my window of tolerance in that scenario where intelligent business operations would ensure that the bed arrives at the right time or close enough to the right time in the right place. And the last example comes from the utilities industry, where from our interaction with many utility providers as our clients, we find that their window, the point at which the value begins to decline, is about 3 minutes after there's an outage. But in fact, their target population can tolerate up to about 3 days in which to have a corrective and appropriate response. The second major trend that I mentioned up front going into 2013 that we think is really going to be important is, of course, adoption of the cloud. There's a lot of misunderstandings about the value of a cloud, and we see a lot of organizations talking about simply moving their business processes to the cloud, outsourcing the work to have somebody else provide it, thinking that that's going to be a less expensive, perhaps more reliable approach. And that's possible, but that really is not the point of cloud. The major reason to move to the cloud is, once again, to optimize on outcomes that are more possible in the cloud than they are on premises. A lot of the adoption that we see for cloud is more in business-to-business or value chain types of interactions. Where we're seeing the current level of adoption is shifting from a focus on using the cloud primarily for pilots and development, testing types of opportunities, really starting to look at collaborative scenarios, business-to-business types of scenarios, maybe extensions of my systems of record with some innovative areas. And many of the end-user adopters are now beginning to push their cloud service provider into using modern BPM techniques in order to drive more differentiation and innovation into their process. They're expecting the platform as a service to be inherently designed for much more flexibility, that designed for change that I mentioned up front. We're also seeing some implementation of productivity and kind of high collaborative types of solution areas, sharing ideas related to processes, sharing data through the cloud, that type of thing. And we think that those approaches can potentially be quite transformative in the next 12 months. The last major trend I wanted to highlight then is this shifting into what we describe as social BPM, the design by doing. In many organizations, and most notably amongst service organizations, we've pretty much done everything that we can do to improve the very structured, predictable, fairly routine, perhaps even back office types of processes. And in service industries, the focus is really shifting to knowledge work and our most expensive expertise, and how can we better support those workers, how can we better empower those workers to get the work done most effectively. And that shift in focus to what Gartner describes as more unstructured processes, where I can't completely predetermine all the actions, all the sequence of actions, all the information I might need in a process. And so I need to support process work in some ways that allows a balance of repeatability but also flexibility, and that's how I drive higher effectiveness. Some of the things you can do to make that shift from very conventional BPM to what I'm describing as social BPM is to shift how you model processes from very traditional focus on the workflow and the sequencing of activities to really focusing on outcomes and the purpose and the capabilities that you need, not necessarily the sequence of those capabilities. It also shifts the focus from pure execution through automation, to better engagement and support of the human efforts, not just those activities that can be automated and made highly repetitive through technology. Social BPM also shifts the focus from this notion of there's some group of experts who can upfront, a priori, sort of decide what is the singular best practice and design for that, to much more emergent design. A lot of cloud efforts today we'll see around collaborative knowledge capture and modeling. You see that, for example, in IBM's BlueWorks or SAP's StreamWorks or even TIBCO's Tibber types of offerings that bring people together in the cloud to collaborate and share their knowledge and emerge with a potential process design. And so a lot of the focus there is not so much on that linear, predictable sequencing, but more empowering the community to collaborate in cycles to deliver iterative improvements to processes. So in wrapping up, a couple of suggestions I would have for you is first to really focus on what's important in your C-suite. What are their top priorities and hot buttons? Secondly, I would try to identify some of your competitors that are admired by your top-level executives and find some that have achieved greater BPM success than you. Our Bpm Summit conferences are a great opportunity to identify and even meet individuals from such companies because we'll have a lot of case studies available at the conference. Based on that kind of assessment, then, look and identify what's your best internal opportunity. What process could you focus on that would most directly tie to those C-suite priorities? Then start to educate your C-suite on the value of this new BPM approach as opposed to maybe their conventional ideas about what process management means. Many of the topics I've talked about today are, of course, going to be highlighted at our Bpm Summit Events this year. There are 3 events in the UK, in the US, and in the Asia-Pacific region in Sydney, indicated here on the slide. And there's more information and links for registering for our events on both the Gartner site as well as the BPM Institute site. So when you think about these major shifts that I've been talking about, I wanted to highlight just a couple things about our conferences that will reinforce these major trends and opportunities. We've completely refreshed the Gartner content on the agenda in order to highlight some of these major trends and opportunities. We have a very exciting external keynote speaker planned this year, David Rock, who is the founder and CEO of an organization called the Neuro Leadership Group, and he's going to be talking about the neuroscience of organizational change. As you aspire and try to transform how your company operates, trying to reach those higher levels of BPM maturity and higher outcomes, one of the biggest challenges is how do I change behavior? And David Rock has a very interesting presentation applying neuroscience and how the brain actually works in order to help us create and tune a change management program very appropriately for our target audience. The overall theme of our event is aspire, challenge, and transform. Aspire for more value than perhaps you've realized to date with BPM, challenge the status quo thinking, and transform how you operate. In order to help you do that, in addition to our content, we also have a show floor with many of the technology providers and consulting companies represented, and then we have, of course, the BPM Institute joining us as well on site, and we've co-located them at the end of our conference to facilitate proctoring a BPM certification exam. One other opportunity for you then to really build up the skills I've been talking about necessary for higher business process management value. It's not just a technology conference, but it's very much focused on the BPM disciplines. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Greg from BPM Institute to share with you just a bit more on what BPM Institute does and will be offering at our event. Thank you very much.
All right, Janelle, thank you very much. I appreciate you encapsulating that for our members, and we certainly look forward to learning more at the summits coming up this year and not too far away in the near future here. So in case folks are not familiar with BPM Institute, we're actually celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. We're the largest practitioner-led community of BPM professionals in the world with just over 60,000 members. And the member services that we provide include training, certification, regional events, a wide range of vendor-neutral BPM and related content, as well as face-to-face and online networking opportunities. And we really try to support the BPM champions within your organizations and provide a number of different resources for them. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about how BPM Institute can support your initiatives. We know from a lot of articles and things that have been written that one of the major inhibitors to enterprise BPM is skills development on your team. And this is something that BPM Institute has been focused on for just about 9 years now. It actually was one of the initial requests we received from the community was try to standardize training in the space. And we've built up a curriculum of just over 30 courses that we call learning paths. We've organized these to be role-based on the typical titles that we see within BPM teams. And the learning paths also provides a recommended sequence or a training roadmap, if you will. And so initially put together with our editorial advisory board, the learning paths are something that we update every year. And more importantly, have been put in place at practitioner organizations like yourselves as a way to train their team. Janelle had mentioned several times about the role of change management that'll be taking place this year. And the scope of our courses does run a full range, everything from BPM 101 to process modeling with BPMN 2.0 to process governance and setting up centers of excellence. And we also feature 2 specific courses that address change management and managing process change. We've been recognized in the industry by a number of different analysts and research firms for our capabilities around training, specifically for individuals and at the enterprise level and customized training. And we deliver the training a host of different ways through face-to-face events that we hold regionally throughout the U.S., through various forms of e-learning, and customized in-house is something that we get a lot of requests for, because that gives us the ability to customize the training specifically for your industry, your projects, and potentially even the platforms and tools that you're using internally to make the training just as relevant as possible for you and your colleagues. Going back about 7 years ago, we noticed that folks were interested in earning credentials around the BPM space. And our first attempt at that was the creation of our Bpm Certificate of Training, which was an 8-course program. And so, one of the things that we noticed with that program, or feedback that we received, is folks were getting a lot of value out of the content in the program, in the individual courses. Our faculty members are unique in the sense that all of them are BPM practitioners themselves, so they work on real-world projects and bring a lot of depth to the conversation. But one of the things that was lacking is there was no final exam or no certification. And so in parallel to building out the Certificate of Training, BPM Institute was working on a professional certification. And that certification exam debuted in Washington, D.C. back in September. It was developed by a team of over 30 BPM practitioners, primarily on the practitioner side. We also had former analysts, authors, Malcolm Baldrige award judges, master black belts, and a wide range of skills that developed the exam. And that exam is aligned to what we think are the key industry bodies of knowledge that exist from folks like PMI, IIBA, and ABPMP. And that exam for 2013 is going to be administered at all of our brainstorm events, as well as Gartner BPM Summits around the world. And the reason the exam was created and the value of the exam is that it really helps to support the advancement of BPM professionals. It gives them a way to measure and document the knowledge and skills that they have, and it also helps employers on the other side of the coin to define job objectives, evaluate position candidates, and assess employee performance. And we really wanted to provide a way for folks to professionally demonstrate that they're qualified to practice their trade. And so the CBPMP exam will be available now. You'll find additional details out on the BPM Institute website. There is a study guide that we have published for free available on the site, as well as coverage areas and frequently asked questions. The coverage map of the exam is really covering those key critical areas within the BPM discipline. Janelle's already mentioned a bunch of these, so I won't read them all to you, but certainly BPM concepts and process discovery and modeling, and process analysis and design and measurement, and understanding that the process-oriented enterprise are all key areas. These, within each of these areas, you'll find a certain percentage of the exam questions are dedicated to that. We list all those percentages on the website as well. And then we put together a frequently asked questions document. You'll find this available on both the Gartner and the BPM Institute websites. It also includes an excerpt from a wonderful article that John Dixon wrote. At the time, it was entitled Bpm Certification is currently a work in progress. And John goes through a couple key points in the importance of BPM certification from Gartner's perspective. It also indicates the specific dates and times when the exam will be happening at the different summits. The first one up will be in London in March. We'll also be down at National Harbor in D.C. in April, Sydney, Australia in May. And then the Brainstorm event series will run in our typical 4 cities, Chicago, San Francisco, D.C., and New York. There are a number of folks that have already graduated and received the certification. And as you can see, there's a mix of both government employees, commercial sector, a host of different titles that are represented. So, we're seeing that whether you're a business process analyst or a business process owner, that there's value in receiving this recognition, both at your company and within the industry. And we congratulate each of these folks for completing the program, and we look forward to additional participation at each of the BPM summits going forward. In addition to co-locating the exam at the summits, BPM Institute will also be moderating a panel discussion, and that will be led by our own Tom Dwyer, who's the editorial director for me at BPM Institute, and also has been instrumental in the construction of our learning paths and the integration of those courses within the BPM discipline and across additional disciplines such as business architecture and service-oriented architecture. Also, BPM Institute members are eligible for discounts to attend the entire BPM Summit. You can find details on that on bpminstitute.org in our events section and under partner events. And we've got some discount codes and links that will get you to the right spot on the Gartner website, and we hope that you can certainly join us there. If folks are interested or looking for more information, they can feel free to email me directly or email our certification team. And with that, I'd like to wrap up today's webcast. And I just wanted to thank you again, Janelle, for lending your expertise and letting us know what's on the horizon for 2013 and what folks can expect at the BPM Summits. And we look forward to hitting the road with you in March.
Great. Thanks, Greg. My pleasure.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye now.